So welcome everyone, and today is Sabbath, February 19th, 2022, and I want to thank you for attending today and continuing our discussion on depression from a biblical perspective, and by means of recap review. I want to start with the section that we ended on last week, and then we'll take it from there. This is, if you recall, I'm using several different resources to help frame our discussion, and one of the main resources that I'm using, and I'll point that out to you momentarily here, is from Insight for Living Ministries, and it's that's the ministry of Chuck Swindoll, and it's a specific counseling insights brochure on depression. As I mentioned, I'm not able, regrettably, to post it for you because it is proprietary information, and there are certain restrictions to do that. But I will be speaking on different sections of it, as well as, of course, just blending it with my own understanding and different verses and other materials as well. So we stopped in this section, and if you please let me know if you're seeing that this section on important signs of depression, and I'll just review a little bit of that to get us started today. So let me know if you're seeing that on screen. Excellent. Okay. All right. So we're talking about just kind of laying a foundation on how depression tends to exhibit itself in the lives of individuals, and also we're looking at different biblical examples. So last week, for example, we looked at the Apostle Paul, and we took a look at 2 Corinthians and how Paul described that he was having some severe discomfort, and he was depressed, right? I mean, there's no two ways about it. He was he was feeling that he was losing credibility with people, and people were trying to get him to come up with new credentials to prove his credibility as a minister. And he had sent Titus off to get some information about the Corinthians, to see how they were reacting to him. They were expecting him to come and visit with them personally, and he didn't know what kind of a reaction he was going to get. And while he was waiting, it's not like now that you can just send an email, right, or text, and in 2 seconds you have information. So he could have been conceivably waiting for weeks or months even for Titus. We don't know the exact circumstances, but while he was waiting for that word from Titus, how things go, that you run all kinds of scenarios through your mind, and you start to create your own thoughts about the situation, whether they're based in reality. And he was very depressed about it, and he describes that depression in the early chapters of 2 Corinthians, and he even uses, in the first chapter, he uses the term comfort about 10 different times, and showing that it was really on his mind. And then by later chapters 6, 7, we find out that when Titus came back, he was able to allay his fears and his concerns, and then he was starting to feel better. But Paul wore his emotion on his sleeve. He wasn't ashamed to do that, and we see that on several occasions in the New Testament. And so we know that he was a man that was very upbeat, and he was very hopeful for the future, and that's what kept him moving forward. And as we'll see today, hope is a key ingredient to push forward out of a state of depression. But depression can be one of those things that it's so powerful and so strong that it can get a grip on you. And even Paul, who was generally a very hopeful, very positive, very upbeat person, and certainly a very faithful person, it even affected him. So imagine those of us who tend to not have the same personality traits as someone like Paul does, how we can sink into that. So these are different signs of depression. They could be emotional in nature. They could be physical. They could be mental, right? So emotional, just we won't go through all this again, but emotional signs of depression could be sadness, restlessness, hopelessness, impatience. You can be irritable, right? And we're going to see today when I talk about a model or a paradigm called the crazy eight, we have a tendency to sort of navigate between positive, not positive, through feelings of anger and feelings of sadness. And we tend to go back and forth between sadness and anger and all the different associated degrees of sadness and anger in between. And so it's not a surprise that different feelings related to anger, etc., or sadness take place here because they're key telltale conditions that lead that will arise when you are in a state of depression. As I mentioned last week, when I say depression, I'm not necessarily referring strictly to what would be considered clinical depression, when you are in fact diagnosed by a medical professional with clinical depression or by a mental health professional. But I'm looking at the full gamut of, everything from the blues, right, and just kind of feeling out of sorts in a particular day, and then in the law or all the way to the extreme of outright clinical depression. But I tend to, when I say depression, I tend to be thinking more of the more severe side, because I think that the word depression, quite frankly, is used way too lightly in our society today, because everybody sort of wants to be an armchair psychologist, right? So everyone thinks that they're depressed. Well, not really, right? There's a big difference, I think, between just feeling the blues, which we all sort of feel, and we tend to feel out of sorts from time to time. And sometimes we just have periods where a particular situation causes us to be sad or particularly angry, or have some of these same types of manifestations of symptoms, if you will. But when I think depression, I think really more to the side of the spectrum that's more on the serious long-term side. But people experience things differently. So I'm kind of putting it all under one big umbrella of depression. But emotional signs, but then you also have physical signs, right? We talked about loss of energy, unexplained weight loss, physical complaints like headaches. Sometimes people experience headaches, and they're not necessarily bound in physical conditions, right? In actual physiological conditions. Some of those things have as a basis emotional conditions that then manifest themselves in a physical way. That's not to say, by the way, that the physical manifestations are not real. They are real, right? But they're not coming necessarily from a physiological source. They're coming from a more psychosomatic source. The term psycho meaning of the brain, right, of the head, and then somatic meaning of the body, right? So it's a combination between what's going on in the head and the body, because it's all interlinked. Nothing is really happening in a vacuum. Changes in eating patterns. Some people binge and they eat a lot. Some people turn to food for comfort. Some people go in the opposite direction and they don't eat at all, right? People are unique. People are different. Changes in sleeping patterns, excessive sleep, insomnia. Again, some people sleep too much and that's all they do when they sleep. And if you see someone that they're always in bed all the time, you're going to want to question that. You're going to want to perhaps intervene and find out what's going on, because too much sleep is as bad as not enough sleep, which is the opposite end towards insomnia. And then you have mental, which is very closely linked, of course, to emotional, but it's a little bit different because it has to do with state, right? Emotional has to do specifically with feelings, and which is the fuel of our actions or inaction. The mental aspects deal more with not so much the feeling per se, but your thought patterns and your behavior that results from those thought patterns. So apathy, right? You're just not motivated by things anymore. Things that used to really excite you no longer excite you. Things that, if me, for example, I love to watch good quality movies. If you see me not touching a movie or not, watching anything, you're going to want to question that, because that's not like me. Some of you love sports. And if all of a sudden you start withdrawing from sports, and, if you're accustomed to going and playing, basketball every Sunday with friends or whatever, and all of a sudden you no longer do that, and you keep coming up with excuses, well, you might want to question that, or a loved one who sees that might want to question that. Or if you're a person that eats very healthily, and all of a sudden you start eating all kinds of junk food, you might want to question that, right? Changes in behavior, increased daydreaming, increased fantasizing, going off into your own little world. All these are potential signs. And again, this is in the aggregate, right? It's not any one thing or any one, two, three things. It's a whole, as I described it last week, depression is not so much a condition as it is a syndrome, right? Which indicates something that has a lot of different components to it that sort of work together to create the syndrome known as depression. And then, of course, thoughts, words, plans, or acts that are suicidal. And I touched upon that very slightly last week. And Yahweh willing, if I have time, I'll talk a little bit more about it later. But these are all things that are signs of depression. So we talked about and we saw some of these elements in Paul in 2 Corinthians. We also read, I think was it Psalm 69 that we read about David. Let me just make sure, because you should have that as a reference. So let me just make sure that I had the right verse there. So let me see here. Yeah, Psalm 69. And Psalm 69 is the one, and I'll put it up on screen here. We won't go through it again, but it's the one that starts, "Save me, O Elohim, for the waters have threatened my life. I've sunk in deep mire, and there's no foothold. I've come into deep waters, and a flood overflows me. I'm weary with my crying. My throat is parched. My eyes fail while I wait for my Elohim." See, you see a bunch of the elements here that I've just described. You see the physical things, right? My throat is parched. Right, I'm weary with my crying. Weary, the mental state is not there. Crying, the emotional state. I've come into deep waters, and of course, he's speaking metaphorically. A flood. In other words, I'm overwhelmed. Right. He's describing overwhelm. Literally, a flood overflows me. And it's obviously it's not literal, but it's an emotional flood that's overflowing him. I've sunk in deep mire. He's gotten stuck and he can't get out. This is the King of Israel. This is the one that is used as an example of the Messiah, a prototype of the Messiah. So imagine, right? If a person like this can go through that, any of us can go through this. So, and then as we go through that Psalm, we find that what's giving David the ability to keep moving forward is his hope in Yahweh. Same thing that pushed Paul moving forward. And we're going to take a look at some more examples today in just a few minutes. So let's go back to the document on depression, and let's look at a simple definition. And I'm sure we can, if we use different sources, we could find several different definitions. But this is a definition from depression: a mental/emotional disorder marked especially by sadness, inactivity, difficulty in thinking and concentration, a significant increase or decrease in appetite and time spent sleeping, feelings of dejection and hopelessness, and sometimes suicidal tendencies. So this definition sort of centers around a lot of the different symptoms, right? And then it says depression is more than feeling low. That's why I say you have this spectrum of feeling. And I tend, when I think of depression, I tend to think along the more extreme feeling of depression, right? Depression is more than feeling low. It's more than having the doldrums. It is a syndrome, a set of symptoms that indicates something more serious than ordinary low mood states, which we all have from time to time. Evaluation includes two key considerations: how severe is the problem and what is the cause, right? And then he goes on from there. So these are different. We're not going to go through all this because there's a lot. I mean, I have like 15 pages of this thing, and it's wonderful material, but it's geared more towards counselors and not just for general discussion. So I'm not going to go through all this. But as I said, I'm using it as the basis for my discussion. So when you think about why a person may be depressed, right? Some of the root causes. Well, I went through some of this last week as well. Difficult situations can cause depression, right? If you had a significant job loss, the loss of a loved one, loss of a friendship, of a marriage, a job, a loss of a pet. People think that that's not serious because it's just quote unquote just an animal. Yeah. If you ever, that spoken by a person who's never had an animal, I'm sorry to say, if you've ever had a pet, you know that pet becomes part of the family, and the loss of that pet can cause a grief every bit as painful, every bit as severe as dealing with the loss of a human loved one. A loss of an opportunity. Maybe you had an expectation that something was going to happen career-wise or move-wise or friendship-wise, relationship-wise, whatever it may be, and it doesn't occur. And that loss of opportunity can cause depression. Health, loss of status, loss of freedom. So all these, so situational considerations can cause depression. Unhealthy thought patterns can cause depression, right? The kind of self-talk in which we engage, dealing with our inadequacies. No one really loves me. I'm unlovable. I'm too ugly. I'm too stupid. I'm too weak. These are the things that we continually, the stories that we tell ourselves and the image that we cultivate of ourselves, right? If we have unrealistic expectations of how the world, how other people, the people around us should be, right? Is the person focusing only on the negative in every situation? You've heard me, some of you have heard me in the past in messages say something like, do you be careful about how you use words, because how you use words can make all the difference in terms of how your life goes, right? There's power in words. Words are intention set out into the world, right? So when Yahweh said, let there be, that's the spoken word, what the scripture refers to as the logos, that became the spoken word out into reality. And now that spoken word becomes intentional. It's like whenever you're going to do something, if you're a person of your word is as good as getting it done, right? So if you say, I'm going to do this, and then you go and you do it, you follow through, the fact that you said, I'm going to do such and such a thing is setting the intention out into the world. It leaves from being just a thought in your mind, in your brain, just something rattling around in your head, and now it's out in the open. And then if you are, again, a person of your word, you're going to fulfill it. In the same way that Yahweh said in Genesis 1, let there be this or that or the other thing. And that's what happened, because we are creators at heart. We have creative ability because we are made in the image of Yahweh. So when we say, I'm going to, right, this is why Yahshua says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, because Yahshua knows that as creations who are made in the image of Elohim, he knows that what we say has a very strong probability of being put into action. It's in a slightly different plane. You remember an instance where there were a couple of the apostles who were displeased with the way they were being treated by Samaritans, and they said, should we call down fire out of heaven? And Yahshua had to put a stop to that, right? Because what they said could very well have translated into reality. Yahshua says, if you say to this mountain, if you have faith the size of a grain of a mustard seed, right, you will say to this mountain, throw yourself into the sea and it'll go, right? He wasn't talking necessarily literally, but essentially he was saying metaphorically that your spoken word, if you have the faith to do it, can move mountains. So there's power in words, but it works in the reverse too, right? It works in the forward in terms of doing positive things and doing things that are creative in nature, but you can create things that are good, but you can also create things that are not so good. And if you're constantly, using the incantation, I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do the other thing, then you're probably going to manifest that in reality, right? It's nothing mystical about that. It's the power of our spoken word, because that's how Yahweh made us. It's because the word is thought put into action. So instead, we need to be saying things that are I hate to say positive, because then people think I'm just preaching a bunch of positive thinking. It's not what I'm saying at all, right? It's like, it's like Tony Robbins says, I'm not the kind of guy who goes out into the backyard and says, there are no weeds, there are no weeds, there are no weeds. Yeah, there are weeds, buddy. And they're going to reach up, they're going to strangle everything else if you don't take care of them. But what he does say is that see things as they are, but don't make them worse than they are. And that's what we tend to do as human beings. We make them worse than they are. So the key is to see them, recognize what they are. Yes, there are weeds, but don't say they're weeds and they're going to destroy us all. No, they're weeds. We identify that, but now we have control over it. We have authority over it, and we can do something about it. So the power of words, right? I'm spending a lot of time here. That's so, so important. The words that we use can make all the difference in our lives. And I'll show you a little bit more about that later when we start talking about ways that you can overcome and conquer depression. Pessimism, right, et cetera, creating a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, then long-term belief systems. What is a belief? A belief is a thought that you think over and over again until it becomes, ingrained in you as something that you think is a fact. And that it is not necessarily a fact, but you've told yourself that story so many times that for you, for all intents and purposes, that thing has become a fact. But you have to, one of the keys to overcoming these things, is particularly with regards to depression, is constantly coming up with better questions, right? So I'm kind of mixing here some of the patterns that lead to depression and the solution that comes along with it, right? So beliefs, you have to be always challenging beliefs. And I don't mean your faith belief. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about those beliefs, those thoughts that you think over and over and over again. I will never be able to do X, Y, or Z. Why not? Are you incapable? Are you, do you not have the same potential capabilities as the next person? No, we all know what strengths we have, etc. But to say categorically, I will never be able to whatever, is probably not true, right? Or just in the day to day, I am this, I am that. Be careful with I am statements that have to do with your character. I am, because they can become an identity. And if you say something enough to yourself that it becomes an identity, then if it's a negative identity, you make yourself believe at some point that that's who you are and you can never change, right? I'm not a person who can fix things, right? I remember that M. Scott Peck, who I've described to you before. M. Scott Peck is dead now. He was a psychiatrist. He was famous for a series of books that he wrote, and the first of which was called The Road Less Traveled, and very, very, very good book. A little up here, but very good book. And it was popular, I think, I don't remember when he wrote it, I think in the early 80s, but it was called The Road Less Traveled. And one of the things that he describes early in the book, he talks about how he never viewed himself as being the type of man that can fix things like cars or, do things around the house, that kind of thing. And he remembers taking a walk one morning and going by a friend of his, a neighbor, who was fixing his lawnmower. And he just made some kind of, he made some kind of offhanded comment. And he said something along the lines of, wow, it must be fun to be able to do something like that or whatever. Or he says something, or maybe he says something like, I could never do something like that. I'm really impressed that you could do that. I could never do something like that. And the guy, he just calmly told him, yeah, sure you could. You don't do it just because you don't take the time to do it. And he thought to himself, he didn't say anything at the moment, but as he thought more about it, he said, maybe he's right. And then the next time, and this is the days before YouTube, right? So the next time that he had opportunity, something went wrong in his car, he just started researching and finding out and taking a good close look at what was happening. And he was able to fix something. And then some lady had a problem with her emergency brake in her car. And in the past, he would have gone and he would have just, looked at it, taken a couple of tugs and said, okay, yeah, this is way beyond me. I kept walking. And instead, he said on this occasion, remembering that conversation, he actually went under there and devoted some time to it. And he started looking and seeing where the cable led and the mechanism and everything. And the bottom line was, within 10 minutes, he had discovered what the issue was. And he fixed the lady's car. He was a hero to this lady. What made the difference? Capability? No, it wasn't capability. It's just that he never thought himself capable of doing it because he never took the time to do it. He just automatically assumed that one of those limiting beliefs, right? And as soon as he got rid of that limiting belief, he was able to start taking action and doing things. And that's the way we are as well. Sometimes we think it is impossible for us to do this, that, or the other thing. And it's not impossible at all. It's just that either because of circumstances of life, because you're studying or you're working in a particular place and you can't do something else at the moment, for whatever reasons, you're not able to do those other things. So your automatic assumption is the one that you've always had, which I can't do this, or I'll never be that, or whatever. And those things can become causes for depression if they become an identity, right? Sometimes it comes from family background, and you're always maybe your family of origin, their default maybe was somber and sad all the time instead of happy and joyful. And maybe you grew up in an environment where there was little laughter and little fun, and that kind of carried with you into your next family. Maybe you've learned to use helplessness as a means of coping because people get comfortable with their depression. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. How in the world would anyone ever get comfortable with depression? Very easily. Because sometimes when you get comfortable with depression, when you accept an identity as a depressed person, Not that I have depression or that I'm currently depressed, but when you accept your identity as I'm a depressed person, then you act like a depressed person. And then that's reinforced oftentimes, sometimes by the people around us who love us and want to comfort us. And because that comfort brings attention to us, somehow that is a way to draw attention and to get connection with people. And that connection is something that we desire so much that we just continue to be depressed, because depression gets us connection. Maybe if we're happy and joyful, people say, okay, they're doing fine, and they don't give you the attention that you really want. So when you're depressed and when you're sad and when you're crying and when you're always down, people will gravitate towards you oftentimes because they want to help. And when that happens, it creates a positive reinforcement. It's not so positive really, right? But in your mind, it's a reinforcement, and that you're getting what you want. So in that sense, it's a positive reinforcement. So what do you do moving forward? You stay depressed, because depression doesn't solve your problems that cause you depression. It keeps you in a condition in which you will never progress, but at least you're going to have connection, because people will gravitate towards you because they want to help you. So it's very, very interesting, the things that we do as human beings. Do you have unresolved anger, right? At family, yourself, the Almighty, life in general, unconfessed sin, right? Like I said, depression, some people think that, especially believers, they think that depression is just a full-blown sin, and that's all it is. That's not true. I just described a whole bunch of stuff that is not necessarily sin. But can unconfessed sin or unwillingness to forgive lead to depression? Absolutely. Happens all the time. Guilt, real or imagined? Absolutely. Physical factors can cause, and we saw that some of that with David, right? Physical factors. I mentioned last week when I first started that that one of the first things that mental health professionals will tend to do when someone indicates that they may be depressed is they urge them to get a medical checkup, because sometimes there are medical reasons why a person may feel depressed, right? There may be a hormonal imbalance. There may be a chemical imbalance. There may be a substance abuse issue. There may be, right now I saw an article about melatonin, that a lot of people are taking melatonin to sleep, and it's causing other issues, right? There's always something that because there's that delicate balance between what happens with the body and what happens with the mind. One of the folks with us last week confirmed, because she's a mental health professional, if that's the case, and we have other mental health professionals with us today that can probably confirm that as well, that sometimes you're going to look at medical issues first to rule out certain things before you start looking at other things, because it's all interlinked. So medical issues, physiology is another, physical factors, right? Maybe you're taking certain medications that keep you down, right? Because those medications, by their nature, that's what they do, right? Maybe the person is not exercising, or maybe they're exercising too much, alcohol or drug abuse, right? Physical illnesses, when I get that atrial fibrillation condition with my heart, that sucks the life out of me. It's not a voluntary thing. I can't. I can will myself to keep moving forward, but I can promise you that I'm not going to be at my peak strength, and it's just by its nature, it keeps you down. And there are all kinds of illnesses that do that. All kinds. Someone may be dealing with cancer. Someone may be dealing with MS, right? And these are all things that can contribute to your mental state, not only because of the physiological conditions, but because of the emotional conditions that go with it. When someone loses certain freedoms that they used to have, a certain amount of independence that they used to have, that can cause, not physiologically, but mentally, that can cause emotional stress, because you can't do things that you used to be able to do before. So there's a certain amount of grief involved, et cetera, and which is always exhausting. Poor nutrition could be an issue. Okay. And then of course there are complex things like brain tumors. And I already mentioned hormonal imbalances, Parkinson's disease, anemia, et cetera. Right. So all of these things, just many complexities. Yes. So whenever someone is depressed, there was a time, believe it or not, and not too long ago, I'm saying within decades, there was a time when particularly religious people were ashamed of admitting that they could be depressed. If you look at at some of the literature, you can see that people suffered in silence because they were just not willing to admit it, because to say that you were depressed, now it seems kind of silly, right? It seems kind of foolish that people would think that way. But even now, there are some people that refuse to go there, or or won't let on that they need help, because they view it either as a sign of weakness or as a sign of vulnerability, which in itself people think is weakness, which is not. It's the exact opposite. To be vulnerable is actually to be strong, but that's a topic for another day. But there was a time not too long ago where people just suffered in silence, and sometimes to the point where they committed suicide because they didn't have anywhere to turn, because there was a stigma around the concept of depression. So messages like this, are my attempt to shed light and to expose that foolishness, right? To expose those harmful thinking patterns that still exist in some quarters where where we don't talk about these things. We have to talk about these things, especially in religious circles. We have to talk about these things because we're here to serve. We're here to help. We're here to serve one another. You think of Romans 12, right? We're here to love on one another and to love other people and to be the Messiah and his voice and to be his love to the people around us. And so we have to expose these attitudes that say that we can't speak about the dark things. Now, if you want to help people, that's wrong. If you want to help people, you got to be like Messiah, right? And if you're going to be like Messiah, hear me carefully, okay? Not just for yourself, but for other people. But if you're going to be like Messiah, you're going to need to step into people's pain, right? This is what Romans 12 is talking about. You're going to have to, it talks about rejoicing with those who rejoice, and let's take a look at it. Romans 12:14. Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not be haughty in mind, but associate with the lowly. And then you might also consider something like Galatians. And let's see if I got this verse right. Yeah, Galatians 6, where he says in verse 2, says, bear one another's burdens and thereby fulfill the law of Messiah, right? And you see in many places. Then you go to the book of Ecclesiastes and you see it there as well, right? Where it talks about, people joining up together to be able to hold each other up. So we need to be able to step into one another's pain, not to live there with them, right? That's important. Not to live there with them, but to get in there so that they can realize that they're not alone, and then to help them find a way out, right? Because that's how we help one another with our various strengths, etc. Okay. All right. So let's go back. So these are all potential causes for depression. Okay. So physical factors, unhealthy thought patterns, limiting beliefs, difficult situations, situational things. Okay. Let me just say a word about medication. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this page, but again, this is a thing that believers tend to be all over the place on different ends of the spectrum with regard to taking medication. There's some people who think that taking any kind of medication is an affront to the Almighty. I'm not one of those people. Okay. If someone wants to have that debate with me, we can have that debate, but I promise you that you're not going to convince me that there's anything wrong with going to doctors and taking medication, etc. I think I've always thought that that's an extreme view. Yeah, I agree with you, Mike, 100%. I think that's an extreme view. I think that this idea that, well, faith is just, total reliance on the Almighty without thinking. What about the fact that the doctors and the caregivers, they are created in the image of Elohim, and as creators, they have the ability to do things that are going to benefit humankind. So yeah, Luke was a physician, right? So I don't know. He seemed to do pretty well in terms of his role in the assembly. So if Luke was a physician, I think that we're okay with physicians. Yahshua talked about physicians, right, in a positive light, etc. So yeah, so there are people who think that medications shouldn't be used for, for any reason, and there are some people who think medication shouldn't be used to treat something like depression. And I say again, people are different, and there are some people who need the medication, right? These are, I like the fact that he included this in this thing: myths and facts about antidepressant medication. Myth: taking antidepressants means I'm not relying on Yahweh. Fact: a person can both rely on Yahweh and take medication to alleviate depression. Of course, that's just common sense. Antidepressants, the myth: antidepressants will make my problems better. That's a good myth to point out. Problems will remain, but a person will feel more able to deal with them, because there are certain things that are happening physiologically that sometimes the people needs that to calm down. Same thing with anxiety, which is a related area here. Some people need anti-anxiety medication, right? There's no shame in that. But you have to still work the problem. There are multiple components to things like anxiety and depression and other mental health issues. There are a number of components, and you need to go to as many professionals or helpers as possible to be able to help you to get through that. And it's not any one, because there are multiple components, like in so many other things. Yeah, you have to deal with the problem itself, and the problem may be a spiritual problem. For example, the problem may be like when Jay Adams and in Nuthetic counseling, they found that a lot of problems were people doing things that they were doing things against their conscience. You remember this one person that was in a catatonic state. The catatonic state, the person kind of gets into, like immobile states and doesn't, for long periods of time, and doesn't come out of them. Well, he remembers a catatonic person, a young man that was confined to an institution and wasn't getting any better. And then when they approached him with a Nuthetic approach, which is, in other words, essentially confronting him, not in a bad sense, but confronting him directly about what kinds of things were happening in his life, what they found out was that he came from a very religious background. And he came from a very religious background, and he was doing things that were contrary to his upbringing. And whether or not you agree with that or not, in terms of how he felt about that, it's not the issue. He knew it. He felt it. So in his mind, I think he was like cheating on his taxes or something like that, and he had been doing it for a long time. And I think he was getting on the verge of being caught and having to pay the piper in terms of criminal penalties and all that. And right around the time when he was about ready to be caught, he all of a sudden started having mental health issues. Imagine that. And he got into a catatonic state eventually. So was it that he was faking it? It's not that he was faking it, right? Like I said, the relationship between mind and body is very, very real and very, very delicate. So it's not necessarily that he was faking it, because he wasn't, but that level of guilt that he had because he was doing things contrary to his religious upbringing led to him having physical issues to avoid dealing with those issues. And when they confronted him about that, he was able to start getting better. And there are many examples that Jay Adams talks about in that regard. So you got to deal with all the issues, right? But in order to get, let's say, someone who's depressed, and maybe part of their depression, or maybe what the root cause of their depression, let's not say part, maybe the root cause of the depression is some kind of thing that they're doing that they're not taking accountability in the eyes of Yahweh. So the depression is real, right? It's not a ruse to try to not deal with their issues. It's real, but it's related. It's like one eventually causes the other, because you're going in that downward spiral, that downward cycle. So the person may not even be able to function, to start working on those spiritual issues without some kind of medication, because maybe they're at the point already that they can't even get out of bed in the morning, and maybe an antidepressant will help them to get out of bed. So you have that aspect, the part to get them out of bed, and then you're going to want to have a counselor, preferably a religious one in that example, to be able to deal with them and help them to overcome those issues that led to the depression in the first place. But to say that they need one to the exclusion of the other is ill-advised, right? So you have to look at all the components and not take a simplistic view when it comes to these kinds of things. And then that last one there, medication alone can cure depression. Well, I think I just described that, right? Life patterns and habits should still be evaluated. Okay. This is what I was saying before. I'm not going to read this thing in full, but I need my depression, right? Once depression gets a foothold, its victim may begin to behave in a way that reinforces the depression. You're getting connected. That may seem counterintuitive to someone who's never experienced that, but to someone that's the only way that they feel that they can get connection, is the only way that they've been able to do it. But the problem is that it's counterintuitive, because eventually it leads to worse things, but they don't realize that as they're going into it. Depression may not be pleasant, but it does help an individual avoid responsibilities, save face, attract attention, and have an excuse for inactivity. The self-pity that usually accompanies depression also serves as a way to deal with loss. Eventually, however, emotionally hurting people realize that the benefits of depression are not really satisfying. In other words, it's just a short-term solution, right? It's not even a solution, really, but it gives the appearance of being a solution. When I do my grief recovery work with people, we'll come back to that in a minute. When I do my grief recovery work, I'm a certified grief recovery specialist through the Grief Recovery Institute in Oregon, and one of the main principles that they teach is that when you're going through the grief recovery process is give me a second, because I lost my train of thought here. Where did I put that article? Okay. Emotional realize the benefits are not really satisfying. Oh, one of the main things that we teach is something that are referred to as short-term energy relieving behaviors, or STERBs for short, STERBS, STERBs, short-term energy relieving behaviors. Well, what's that? Well, those are all the different things that we use in order to avoid the real issues, right? Those are the ways that we use to cover over pain that seem to give a resolution, but they're really just doing a very poor resolution on the surface, essentially just covering over what really needs to be looked at. So they give the appearance of you dealing with the issue, but you're not really dealing with the issue at all, right? We all know what those things are. We all engage in them in our own ways, right? So, some of the more common ones are alcohol, right? Prescription drugs or any kind of drugs, hard drugs, gambling, pornography, shopping, right? Overwork, those kind of things. So it's in other words, pick your poison. Some of them are actual substances that directly deliver the dopamine hit to your brain to make you feel alive and to make you feel that you're actually dealing with an issue. Some of them are behavioral, which also eventually lead to the dropping of hormones, not hormones, but the receptors, neuroreceptors, and like dopamine that give you the hit. So whether you get it directly through a substance or you get it indirectly through a behavior that creates the substance in your brain, they're all different. They're all following a similar function in terms of helping us to deal with the issue in a superficial way. So it gives the appearance of resolving the issue, but the actual issues remain. And it's taught in the context, of grief recovery, because you cannot ultimately recover from grief until you deal with the issue at hand. In other words, until you sit with the pain, right? There are no shortcuts, friends, right? When you're dealing with issues of life, somehow or other, you're going to pay the piper, right? Because you can ignore the issue for as long as you want, but typically what that means when you ignore the issue is that you still wind up with the original issue plus all the things that compound that original issue while you're trying to avoid the original issue. Does that make sense? So, when it comes to feelings and emotions, we don't want to deal with what's actually causing those feelings or emotions, the thoughts that dealing with those. We don't want to deal with the boredom that's causing it, or we don't want to deal with the shame, or we don't want to deal with the sense of inadequacy or the sense of incompetence, or a half dozen other words that you can put in there. So instead of dealing with those actual issues, we deal with them by covering them over. So we either, when it comes to feelings / emotions, I use those terms interchangeably, we either want to resist them, which is like taking a beach ball and trying to push it on the water. The harder you push, if you ever try to do that, it just pushes right back up, right? Because there's no way that you can do that. You can't win that struggle. We either want to resist it or we want to avoid it altogether, right? Turn tail and go in the other direction. And, or we want to pretend that it doesn't exist. And it's not really there. It's not really a problem. But none of those things, resisting, reacting, right? Or avoiding, none of those things deal with it. The only way, like Jay Adams teaches, and everybody teaches that knows what they're talking about, the only way to deal with those issues is through them, right? So with the problem, you can't avoid it. You can't, go backward. You can't pretend it doesn't exist, go sideways. You got to go through it. And that's the painful process because it involves sitting with the pain, not living with it, but sitting with it and letting it say what it says. And that's the absolute last thing that we want to do is sit with the pain. So we find all kinds of ways to not deal with the pain and pick the pain and pick your pain and pick your poison. And we all do it, right? Everyone who's here, you all have your own way that you deal with that. You have your own short-term energy relieving behaviors. And most of humanity is the same way, right? If you ask, 100 people, maybe 80% of the people will admit to it and the rest of them are lying, right? So it's just the way human beings do. So the way that we deal with all this is by actually confronting that. That's when you can start dealing with the problem, right? And otherwise depression can be the result of not dealing with it. So is that showing up again on screen? Yeah, Silas putting some notes up there, and you can feel free to take a look at those. And those are links that might be helpful to anyone who wants to look for additional resources. So he says, eventually, however, emotionally hurting people realize that the benefits of depression are not really satisfying because they don't, right? Short term. Such people begin to hate what they are doing, and in time, they may end up hating themselves, which in turn can create more depression. And this is why in many cases, sadly, you see people get to the point of suicide. Okay. Like I did last week, I want to just pause for a minute and give you a few stats on suicide because it's one of those topics that's near and dear to my heart. And these days, it's getting worse, and it's sad. But during the pandemic, I mean, I don't have to tell you, right? We've all experienced the level of loneliness and the level of isolation that we've experienced in the middle of the pandemic, and and it's something that that I think that so many people just don't know how to handle. But here were the statistics back in 2018 for the United States, specifically for the U.S., released by the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So the number of suicides in the U.S. in 2018 was 48,344. And it's kind of hovered around that number, 48,000, 47,000, around there for several years. I strongly suspect that the next time that they do these for 2021, that it's going to be significantly higher. And by significantly higher, my guess would be over 50,000. I hope I'm wrong, but that's my guess. But it's been hovering around 48,000 or so. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death for Americans. An average of 132 suicides every day. That's staggering when you think about that. 132 suicides every day. The number of attempts is even greater, right? Now, this is yearly, the number of attempts, 1.4 million attempts. And of 1.4 million attempts, 48,000, give or take, succeed. There are 5 million living Americans who have attempted suicide. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people, 5 million people. And I think I mentioned this not last week. The methods, the biggest method is firearms, which is 50%. And people have, and there are reasons for that, right? It's very efficient. It's very efficient to be able to do it with a firearm. And there's availability, right? And this is one of the reasons when you're dealing with someone who is potentially suicidal, you want to ask them if they have a plan, and you want to ask them if they have accessibility to weapons, right? Because if they have a plan to off themselves and they have ready accessibility to weapons, that's not a good combination, right? And you always have to take that seriously. Suffocation / hanging is the next biggest one, 28.6%. And that's usually one of the reasons that's usually very popular also. I hate the term, talk about it in terms of popularity, but that's the word. One of the ways is because of accessibility again, right? You could take bed sheets, so you could take, clothing, a belt, right? Poisoning, and that means, generally speaking, that means drugs, right? Like for drug overdoses, you poison your body with drugs, 12.9%, and then other methods, 8%. Listen to these demographics; these are kind of interesting. And again, I don't know if this is back as of 2018, and the course that I take that I get this from, which I get this from the American Association of Christian Counselors. This is fairly recent. The course came out. This particular one came out last year, so this is fairly up to date. But I'm sure the new figures are coming out if they're not out already. But this has been pretty consistent too. Demographics remember, this is just the United States. This is not worldwide. United States demographics: middle-aged white males are most at risk. It's interesting. But suicides on the rise in every age group, especially in children ages 10 to 14. Can you imagine? Children ages 10 to 14. This is an interesting stat. Females attempt suicide significantly more than males. Females attempt suicide significantly more than males, but are not successful due to the method used. Because a male will typically go to what? Go to a firearm, right? Lowest risk, interestingly enough, lowest risk is Black women. I don't know the reasons for that. They don't give that stat here. And then there's a whole host of reasons. Who is at high risk for suicide? And I won't go through all these, but substance abuse is number one. Who is at risk for suicide? People who abuse drugs. And the second is mental illness, of which depression is at the top, right? Depression, bipolar disorder, personality disorders. I wrote down from the notes that I took, conduct disorders in young people in particular, conduct disorders. And then anxiety disorders, things like PTSD. And there are a whole bunch of other things here that's good, but the purpose of this message isn't suicide per se, but I did want to share some of the stats for you. Suicide is a very, very real problem. And those stats are all, as I said, for the US, but I would dare say that if you looked at stats around the world, there may be some differences because of cultural issues, et cetera, but probably not way off base. There may be differences because of accessibility to firearms, et cetera, but people are people, right? And they're going to do things in very similar ways. So this is a worldwide problem. I keep an eye on the news all the time, and so many individuals, celebrities, and pop stars, all kinds of things. Politicians. I mean, it's epidemic, and it's pretty bad. So we need to know about these things because, if you yourself, praise Yahweh, hopefully not, but if you yourself don't experience depression and get to that point, or suicidal tendencies, you may run across people who do at some point, whether they're family members or friends, maybe people who don't have the kind of hope that you do from a religious standpoint. Can you imagine people in the middle of this pandemic that don't see a way out, that have no sense of hope? Because when they look around and they see all the different potential sources of hope, whether it's governments or whatever, they see that there's this chaos everywhere. That it's unconscionable to me that people would have no hope. But let's face it, for everybody here, faith is a great component. At least I hope it is a great component of that hope. But a lot of people don't have that. So how do you help them deal with those kind of things? Well, hopefully some of this material will help. Let's I'm going to skip over a bunch of these things. This was very important, so I won't speak a lot about it though, but an important antidepressant: social skills. One of the worst things that can happen with individuals who are depressed is that they withdraw from other people, right? So you need to help individuals who are isolating themselves to connect with other people. So very important, because you can't do it alone. And as I said last week, a bad question to ask someone who's depressed is, how are you doing? Right? It's not helpful. How are you doing? Well, how do you think I'm doing? Right? I'm sinking in the mire. Like David here, right? In Psalm 69, I sink in the miry depths where there's no foothold. And by the way, you can talk all kinds of platitudes to people who are in depression, and they're not really listening. And they're not really listening, not because, yeah, or I'm fine. That's the catchphrase of our Western society in particular. How you doing? I'm fine. How are you doing? I'm fine. It's a, it's the standard lie that we tell ourselves. Why? Because people don't want to hear what's really happening. That's culturally, that it's not acceptable to say, well, I'm really having a miserable time of it lately. So people just, I'm fine. It's either not culturally acceptable, people don't want to hear it, or they're uncomfortable, they don't know what to do with it. So we don't share it. And we just kind of grin and bear it, right? That's how we do things in our society. We grin and bear it. Well, we just gotta push through it, just gotta barrel through it. And a half dozen other stupid phrases that we use that are nonsensical and that we keep lying to ourselves and to the people around us. We're not fine. We're not fine. And religious people double that, right? I'm fine. I'm blessed. If I hear another religious person say something like that, yeah, snap out of it. Yeah, exactly, Elder Mike. If I hear another, gotta trust Yahweh. I just, I don't want to get violent, right? But that kind of stuff agitates me because it's not real. It's not authentic. We're not fine. We're going through stuff, and we need to be honest with each other and with Yahweh. One of the things I love the most about the Psalms, I've said this before, one of the things I most love about the Psalms is how honest they are. David is not holding back, right? And others in there. David isn't, he's not, well, Father, he's not hedging his bets. Well, Father, you've always been so good to me. You've always been so good to me. And I hate to mention anything. No, why have you left me alone? How long are you going to watch while my enemies circle me? Right? How, can't you see that my bones are cracking in me? David is honest about those things because he could talk to Elohim. He knows that Elohim is Elohim. He's not a man that he's going to lie to him and give him and feed him a line. I've come into the deep waters. The floods are engulfing me. Where are you? I'm worn out calling for help. I've been calling on you. How come you're not listening to me? You're going to wait till I sink before you go? My eyes fail looking for my Elohim. I'm looking for you, and you're not showing up. My eyes are failing me. I'm doing this for so long. No, he's not doing it necessarily because he's not doing he's spiteful, right? On the contrary, he loves Yahweh. And that's evident everywhere. So I'm not encouraging you to be mean and spiteful with Yahweh and to shake your fist in the air. That's not what I'm encouraging you to do, but I'm encouraging you to be honest with Yahweh. When you go to pray, is it the flowery language? I long ago gave up the flowery language, right? People, do 12-minute prayers on how, Father, and the resplendent lights of your luminous nature and the thing of the. No, my prayer is more like to be, Father, I am miserable today. Can you help me? I had that argument with my wife, and I can't have this disharmony, and I need to show me where I need to make the corrections or whatever. Or, Father, I'm feeling terrible today. I need your help. Can you help me get through that? I don't deserve it, but can you help me? Why am I going to waste my time? I'm not going to waste his time because he is time, right? He's beyond time, actually. He's not even time. He's beyond time. But just a figure of speech, right? I'm not gonna waste my words on inauthentic stupidity that impresses nobody, because nobody's listening to that foolishness. Nobody's listening to that. Yahweh already knows our thoughts, right? He can handle it. He's our Elohim. So if we're hedging our words and finding the nice, neat things to say, don't. Talk to him. Let him know. And he's given you people in your life to help you to deal with things. Talk to them. And if you don't have reliable people around you. I don't know your personal life. Find someone. They're out there. I promise you. They're out there. But you got to connect and you got to be authentic, because you're not doing yourself a service or the people around you a service by ignoring it and praying that it goes away. Right? When you're in a condition of depression, it's a signal that something is going wrong. It's more of a symptom of a deeper issue than the issue itself. Depression, my friends, is not ultimately the issue. It's something else that's going on in our lives for which we need to take action. And the key word there is action, right? Words alone are not going to do it, because we all know intellectually, we all know in the head what should be. But what we need to is pay attention to what's happening in the heart, so that there's a melding of what's happening in the head and the heart, right? So let's look a little bit more at this. So, there's stuff here about, different purposes why we suffer. I'm gonna go over that, skip that. But I want to go over a couple more examples. I want to look at the example of Elijah, right? So let's go read in 1 Kings 19. I think we actually left off looking at 1 Kings 19 last week. And this is Elijah fleeing from Jezebel. He had just had the contest with the priests of Baal. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and now he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "So may the Elohim do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." And he was afraid. So notice the first thing there. That oh, you know what? I don't think I have this up. I'm sorry. Okay, how's that? Okay. So Jezebel claims, "I'm going to do to you what you did to these prophets. I'm going to kill you." Plain and simple. There's nothing subtle about this. I'm going to make your life as one of theirs. In other words, it's over. And he was afraid. So fear is one of the immediate things that can lead to depression, right? He was afraid. He had done marvelous things by the grace of Yahweh, but he was afraid, and rightfully so. It wasn't an idle threat for the queen of Israel to say, "I'm going to kill you." And he was afraid and arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba. That's a very natural reaction. I would have done the same probably, which belongs to Judah, and left the servant there. But he himself went the day's journey. But look at the progression here. He's afraid, he flees. He himself went the day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down. So notice, he goes a day's journey into the wilderness. So what is he? He's alone now, right? He's isolated. He left his servant at Beersheba, right? Maybe it would have been better for him to take his servant with him, because at that point, he needed the friend maybe more than ever. But he left the servant there for whatever reason. We're not told why. That's okay. But he himself went the day's journey into the wilderness. So you see, this is the problem, because now he's alone. He came and sat down under a juniper tree. So he sits there under the juniper tree, and then he stays there. He doesn't deal with the emotion. He sits under the emotion, under a juniper tree, alone. And by the way, I'm not saying any of these things by any stretch as a criticism. I'm just observing the facts, right? Because these are the facts. And this teaches us, because this ultimately was not a good plan. He himself went a day's journey. He sits under the juniper tree, and he requested for himself that he might die, and said, "It's enough now, O Yahweh, take my life, for I'm not better than my fathers." He reaches the point where he's in despair, right? I don't even reach the level of my fathers. He's asking Yahweh to take his life, literally. So he's suicidal. Now, we don't tend to think of it in those terms, because he's not saying, "I'm going to go and take my own life," but he's asking Yahweh, who he trusts, to take his life. I'm sorry, that's suicide. That's suicidal. He wants to die. He lay down and slept under a juniper tree. So he starts out, he sits down, now he just lies down to die, to wait to die, right? This is a natural reaction. If you've ever been in a high level of depression or anywhere close to it, you know what that's like, to just want to lie down and die. And maybe not to the point where you actually want to die, but it's an expression, right? I just want to die. We just want to be swallowed up in anonymity and not deal with anything. You want to withdraw from life. right? Which is maybe not death, but it isn't living either. He laid down and slept under a juniper tree, and behold, there was an angel touching him, and he said to him, arise, eat. So it's interesting that one of the first things the angel has him do is to eat something, right? Then he looked, and behold, there was at his head a bread cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. So a little bit of progress, right? He eats something, right? The angel of Yahweh came again, and notice this is the angel treating him. So he gives him something to eat. The angel of Yahweh came again a second time and touched him. By the way, I want you to notice that too, right? And I don't think I'm reading too much into it. The angel came and touched him. It's important to touch a person who is in depression, right? And by touch, I don't necessarily mean physically touch, right? That might be helpful too, to hug or whatever, a person who might need a hug, but it's connection, exactly. That's what I mean when touch. He connected with him. He needed someone to connect with him. Someone who's in depression needs connection. And don't be, let me give you a tip too. Don't be, as someone who has been depressed before, don't be fooled or swayed or distracted by the, I'm good, it's all good, right? And or the other extreme, the person who gets angry, just stay away from me, right? Ignore them. Because what they don't need is more isolation. You can be a little bit innovative on how you do that so that you're not in their face, but yeah, you're not going to leave them alone, because that's not what they need at that moment. They don't need to isolate even more. They need connection. They need to know that there's another human being that loves them and that has their best interest at heart. So he touches him and he said, arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. And by the way, and I'm just kind of picking things up as I go along here. He says, arise, eat. So this is kind of a plan of action, right? Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he's telling them to prepare, right? Arise. He's giving him an action to take. He doesn't come to him and notice it. He doesn't say, Elijah, wow, I feel for you. And yeah, let me lie down here next to you. And we'll kind of, because sometimes we think that that's what connection is, right? That we're just going to have total empathy and we're just going to kind of wallow in the mire with someone. No, that's not what they need. No, it's good to get in there, but not to stay there with them, right? It's to pull them out, right? It's to I see you, I hear you, I know that you're hurting, but let's get out of here together. He says, arise, take an action, get up. Got to get up, Elijah. Got to get up. Start by eating something simple, not a big spiritual thing. Don't get up and pray 3 prayers a day, right? That's just sometimes the spiritual people want to do. Oh, pray to Yahweh. That's their solution to everything. Pray to Yahweh. Yeah, no kidding, buddy. Go away. How do you respond to that when you're not in the mood? Does that sound blasphemous? Sorry, I don't mean it to be, but that's a waste of time. And that's a waste of a person's, energy. Of course they know intellectually I should pray to Yahweh. That's not what they want to hear at the moment. At the moment they want to live. You're not ready to pray to Yahweh. You want to live. And sometimes the thing to live is maybe one little step in front of the other. And maybe the only thing that you can do is get up and and go to the kitchen and fix something simple to eat. That's a step. It gets you out of bed. Get up and prepare something for your kids. You're in pajamas every day. Come on, it's time to get up and get something. And you know what? They're going to protest, right? I want to go. No, come on, let's go with love, but firmness, right? No. You've been sleeping a lot. Let's get up and go. You don't have to be insulting about it. You don't have to be mean about it, but you got to be firm, because they're not going to want to do it, because they're in a condition where they're not listening to reason. They're not listening to rationality, right? So you have to be the rational one for that person. No, come on, let's go. Let's get you showered. I don't know about you guys, but me, if I'm in one of those funks, right? Let's call it a funk. Sometimes I can go 2 or 3 days where I'm just not, I don't change clothes or whatever. I don't do that often, thankfully. But I've gotten into situations where that if I don't, and this, I'm just gonna be very blunt with you, right? It's, if I don't shower for a couple of days, I know that there's something wrong up here, because that's not me. That's not like me. So for me, I got to get up. I got to get clean, because I associate cleanliness with being ready to move and being ready to go. And when I don't do it, I know that I'm starting to slip into the mire. It's like my version of slipping into the mire. Because how I am externally reflects what I am internally. So one of the best things for me is to get up, is to, is to shower, is to, get my hair fixed, is to get nice clothes on. If I've been wearing just shabby clothes every day, maybe that particular day I put on a nice button shirt or whatever to change the atmosphere. I got to do things that get me back into living. And sometimes I need someone to help to push me. Sometimes that's my wife, right? And that's something that I will do for anyone else if they need that. Because when we're in that mindset, we're not listening to the rational, because it doesn't mean anything to us. You're checking out of life in those moments. So you need someone to be there to help to lift you up, right? So let's go back to Elijah. Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he's arise, eat, take some action, but there's also empathy, right? Because the journey is too great for you. He doesn't say, Elijah, oh, stop being such a wimp. Elijah, haven't you seen that Yahweh's been with you all this time? How can you do this, right? That's the spiritual judgment that comes from people that I wanted to scream and hit something when I see that. Oh, you just got to trust. What, don't you trust the Almighty? Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for your help. It's empathy. Arise, eat, because the journey is too great for you. You're struggling, and you got a long journey ahead of you. It's too great for you. And he's acknowledging. He's not excusing him, but he's acknowledging this is tough for you. I get it. So he arose and ate and drank, and he did it, right? Because he saw the reason and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of Elohim. That was a big pick-me-up. That gave him some time, right? Then he came there to a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of Yahweh came to him, and he said to him, and notice that Yahweh never abandoned him. He was always there. But it's interesting that he took action moving towards Yahweh, right? But he wasn't able to do it alone. And your angel on a given day may be your wife or your husband, maybe one of your children. It may be a friend that you haven't spoken to for years, and Yahweh sends them your way with a phone call or something. And you got to be receptive enough to be able to see it and answer it. Or if you're the person helping the depressed person, you be that person. You be that angel. Then he came to a cave and lodged there. And behold, the word of Yahweh came to him. And he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? So he's inquiring after him. Elijah, it's a reality check, right? He's helping him to get past the self-pity. What are you doing here, Elijah? Let's get some clarity here, Elijah. What's happening? You're not supposed to be here, Elijah. What's happening here? So you inquire. In other words, ask better questions, right? What are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I've been very zealous. And by the way, another thing, when you ask the person, be ready to get the answer, right? Because you may be the only person who's asking the person. This person may be suffering for a long time, and you may be the only one who's finally dared to ask the question, because everyone else has said, how you doing? And they're waiting with bated breath, because they know there's something wrong, but they're waiting for with bated breath for the answer, the only answer that they really want to hear. I'm fine. But you're a person of courage, and you're a person who's really going to help. And what you're going to say is, what are you doing? Elijah, what are you doing here? And when you ask that question, be ready to hear the answer, because it may come out like a flood. Are you willing to stand there and take it with love? He came out. He said, I've been very zealous for Yahweh, the Elohim of hosts. I've been doing all these things for the sons of Israel. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left. And they seek my life to take it away. So he has this martyr complex, right? I'm the only one left. Because sometimes we think when we're isolating ourselves, we think I'm the only one going through this. No one else is going through this. And then he may even be amplifying the problem a bit. And they seek my life to take it away. Well, we know Jezebel's after his life, so he wasn't making that up, right? But is it everybody that's going to seek his life to take it away? Or is it just one person that Yahweh's about to deal with in a very strong way? So it's like you made this problem like larger than life. I'm the only one left, and everyone else is seeking my life to take it away, you see, because we see our problems as multidimensional, as bigger, larger than life. It's not to minimize the problem, but is it really as big as you think it is? Probably not. Probably not to that degree, but that's what we see. That is the story that he was telling himself. But Yahweh was telling him another story, and he was clarifying for him. So he said, Yahweh said to him, go forth and stand on the mountain before Yahweh. In other words, now let's look at the reality. This is a story that you've been telling yourself, but let's talk about what actually is happening here. And let me give you some perspective. And behold, Yahweh was passing by. And a great and strong wind was rending the mountains and breaking in pieces the rocks before Yahweh. But Yahweh was not in the wind. So sometimes solutions, we're looking for the solutions in the big, in the huge, because we want to see the earthquake. Yes, that's what's going to fix my problem. And after the wind, well, first one was the wind, right? You know, the really, really strong winds, like, you know, whatever. We had a squall that went here just a few minutes ago, that kind of thing, right? And then there's an earthquake, but Yahweh wasn't in the earthquake. After the earthquake, a fire, all these cataclysmic things that they seem that that's where the solution should be, but Yahweh was not in the fire. Where was Yahweh? After the fire, the sound of a gentle blowing. There are many different versions. Some say sound of a gentle blowing, some, you know, whisper in the wind. Other things have something altogether different. But what they all have in common is this grandness that Elijah was waiting in which to hear the voice of Yahweh. And then there was this stillness, the thing that is not expected. It's like Yahshua dealing with the apostles, and the solution to everything is turned upside down. They're all looking for the grand king to come in and chop off the heads. And Yahshua said, no, we're going to do it by love. We're going to do it by washing the person's feet. We're going to do it by healing and by removing this oppression of demons and sickness. That's how we're going to do it. Yeah, they all do it. The Gentiles do it with the power of the sword. And, you know, right now in Canada, the horses are trampling on people and all kinds of things, right? That's how worldly governments do it. But that's not how we do it. We do it by talking to people. We do it by showing compassion and by showing love. We do it with the sound of a gentle blowing. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, because that's when he finally heard it, when he was still and he stopped with the expectations of the grand thing and then realized, no, this is the way it's coming. It wasn't the way perhaps I imagined it, but this is where the solution is coming from. When Elijah heard it, and he heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle, another action, and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave, because now he's ready to listen. And behold, a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Then he said, I've been very zealous for Yahweh, the Elohim of hosts. He's still telling the story. For the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I alone am left, and they seek my life to take it away. So he's making progress, but this is not a simple solution, right? He's still telling himself the same story. But at least every action that he takes, getting up, eating something, wrapping himself in the mantle, and going to listen, every action that he takes is getting him closer to the solution, is getting him closer to Yahweh. And then in verse 15, Yahweh said to him, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you have arrived, you shall anoint Hazael king over Aram. More actions. And Yehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. So Yahweh recognized that Elijah needed a rest. Remember, there's a lot of stuff that happened here that we haven't gone through in the previous chapters. Elijah had been through some stuff. So he needed rest. He wasn't ready to continue forward, but at least he was healing to the point where he could move forward. It shall come about, the one who escapes to the sword of Hazael, Yehu shall put to death, and the one who escapes to the sword of Yehu, Elisha shall put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, and that's not meant to be a literal number. I will leave, in other words, of the innumerable amount of people, I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed them. Elijah, you are not alone. I promise you. So do these things and trust me. But he may not have been able to hear any of that before he had done the other, right? So this is all example of Elisha. There's much more I could say, but we're already coming upon 5 o'clock. Let me give you another example. And then I'll give you a few quick, I've been telling you things along the way in terms of how to deal with it, but I'll just kind of summarize some things and then we'll end there. I don't have time to give you Jonah, but Jonah went through similar things. If you read through the 4 chapters of Jonah, you'll see that Jonah was, he wanted to die, right? Under the tree in chapter 4. So we went through a similar process. But I want to show you Moses, right? So we'll start with Moses, from verse 1. Now the people, and I'll point out some things like I did with Elisha. The people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of Yahweh. That's very mild, right? The people who became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of Yahweh. And when Yahweh heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of Yahweh burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. The people therefore cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to Yahweh, and the fire died out. So that's one instance. And then the rabble, verse 4, who were among them had greedy desires, and the sons of Israel wept again. Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the Egypt and all the fish and the leeks and the onions and blah, blah, blah. Now our appetite is gone. There's nothing at all to look at except this manna. Well, this manna has kept you alive, but I guess it's not important. The manna was like coriander seed, etc. And then down in verse 10, now Moses heard the people. Remember, this is going on a long time, right? Now Moses, it's not the first instance of dealing with these people. Now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each man at the doorway of his tent. And the anger of Yahweh was kindled greatly, and Moses was displeased. As I mentioned last week, this concept here, Moses was displeased, is essentially saying Moses was depressed. And let's hear it. Let's hear what he was like. So Moses said to Yahweh, why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight? Now, notice the tone of his voice, right? Who is he speaking to here? He's not speaking to he's not giving it to the ones who deserve it, right? He's not giving it to the ones who he's reacting, right? And the only way he can react is to his friend. Yes. You ever had a friend or a family member and you go off on them and they're not the cause of your pain, but they're the only ones who are nearby. So they kind of serve as your whipping post to do it. Well, Yahweh's being Moses' whipping post here, right? Why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight? You've laid the burden of all these people on me. It's too heavy. It's a burden. It's like David's overwhelmed, right? Except he uses a different metaphor. It's a burden. It's like I'm carrying something that I can't carry. Then listen to him. Listen to the severity as he goes along, the progression. Was it I who conceived all these people? Was it I who brought them forth? In other words, did I give birth to them? Am I their mother? This is what he's saying, right? This is prettied up in modern language, but that's essentially what he's saying. But why are you giving me all these people to deal with? Am I their mother? Was it I who brought them forth? You should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries the nursing infant to the land which you swore to their fathers. Where am I to give meat to give to all these people? For they weep before me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. He's in anguish. For they weep before me, say, give us meat that we may eat. I alone am not able to carry all these people because it is too burdensome for me. He recognizes it. He acknowledges it. So if you're going to deal with me thus, please kill me at once. If you're not going to help me, just kill me. If I found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness. In other words, if I've done anything to please you, just kill me. I mean, think about the state of mind to be able to tell the creator of the universe this thing, right? Do not let me see my wretchedness. I don't even want to look at myself. I can't even look at myself in the mirror, so to speak, right? So just kill me so I can be done with it. This is Elijah's same situation, no? Moses is in a very bad state here. And Yahweh listens patiently, and he says to Moses, gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel. So he sends them to do an action. He doesn't say, Moses, I hear you. Just lay down and relax it. No. Go gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel. I hear you, Moses, whom you know to be the elders of the people and their officers, and bring them to the tent of meeting and let them take their stand there with you. Then I will come down and speak with you there. I'll take of the spirit which is upon you and will put it upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you. I'm going to give you relief so that you will not bear it all alone. Yahweh will help. He's hearing. Say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat, for you have wept in the ears of Yahweh. And then he gives, consequences for all the things that they had been doing that were incorrect, right? And then it's interesting because down in verse 23, Yahweh said to Moses, because Moses starts saying, hey, the people are 600,000 on foot. And you said at verse 21, I'll give them meats that they may eat for a whole month. Should flocks and herds be slaughtered for them? See, it's this depression that he's in, that his reaction here is all anger, right? Elijah was more sadness, right? That was his default. His default was sadness. I'm the only one left. Woe is me. Right? Moses' thing is, destroy them or destroy me, right? Should flocks and herds be slaughtered for them to be sufficient for them? Or should all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to be sufficient for them? Yahweh said to Moses, is Yahweh's power limited? He gives him a bit of reality check. And sometimes you might have to get tough with your person as well, right? Who are you talking to? Yahweh said this, is Yahweh's power limited? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not. Saying, Moses, I got this. This is, my power is not limited. So relax, right? So sometimes you may have to speak strongly to the person too. And Moses, to his credit, went out and did it. And of course, Yahweh did exactly as he said he was going to do. Okay. And I can go more deeply into this, but I think you get the point. But I want to stop here, and I want to share with you very quickly this concept of the that I mentioned earlier about the Crazy Eight. So let me find it, and I will pull that up in a moment. So the Crazy Eight, as I pull it up, is just a paradigm introduced by Tony Robbins about how patterns of behavior that human beings tend to operate in. And this is this Crazy Eight. It's called Crazy Eight because it's like a number 8 on its side, Crazy Eight. And it's just showing a cycle, right? So if you look on, and let me pull this up here, my spotlight. So if you look at my spotlight, you see that you have essentially 2 sides of this on a very basic level. The one side deals with feelings of anger, right? Defiance, anger, frustration, resentment, all the different, the spectrum, everything from irritation to frustration and enragement, right? And then on the other side, you have depression, which at the extreme, or just sad, sensitive, lonely, misunderstood, isolated, right? It's like the sad feelings on one side and the anger feelings. And the idea behind this model, which is what this is just that we as human beings tend to cycle back and forth between this. How does this work? Well, if you're a person who defaults to sadness, and you know who you are. I showed you 2 examples. One is Elijah, who tends towards sadness, and Moses, who tends towards anger. It's just a personality thing, right? I mean, Elijah was a bit angry too, but it was more like, I'm isolating myself. I'm going away. I'm withdrawing. I'm just going to lie down and die. Moses was like, kill me, right? And be done with it. We all have a default setting. And if you know yourself, we have both, right? We both do anger and sadness, but one of them is the one that we default to, right? And you know who you are. You know, if you're the person when you get into your worst states, that you're the kind of person that moves towards anger, and you got to kind of deal with it, or you're the person who just kind of, what's the use, right? Then you're the sadness person. This will never work. I'll never be able. I might as well just go in a corner and just wait for whatever happens, because right, you know who you are. And what happens is you start in that, whatever your default is, that's where you start. But you don't typically stay there. You can't. Why? Because it's exhausting. Whichever one you are, it doesn't matter. It's exhausting to remain in that state. That, when I say state, I mean emotional state. It's exhausting to remain in that state. So at some point, you go in the other direction and you start going to the other thing, because you need to change in state, because you're mentally, you're not going to be able to survive unless you change your attitude. But eventually what ends up happening is you go back to your default state. And this pattern goes back and forth in a never-ending spiral. So it works something like this. You start off, if you're the person that goes into sadness, you start off like, wow, nobody cares about me. No one really cares if I'm here. They don't really recognize what I do. And, and it's maybe a mother who's not appreciated at home, let's say, right? Or something like that. And, and then at some point, and then no one's paying attention to her and recognizing her sadness, or maybe they, give her a little bit of attention, but not a whole lot. And then eventually what happens? Eventually you get mad, right? No one's listening to me. That I'm gonna have to take some action here. I'm gonna have to make some noise here so that people can finally notice me and stop ignoring me. And now you're in anger, right? And you're, angry and blah, blah, blah. But that's also unsustainable over time. So that gets attention, because people say, what's wrong with her? She's never like this or whatever, right? But then at some point, again, that gets old, right? And the people who are giving you that attention, they're not going to do that forever. Sometimes they may even start shunning you or, rebuking you or whatever. And then when they start doing that and just kind of avoiding you, whatever, then it gets back to at some point you go, oh, what's the use? And I'm back to being sad again. And boy, just nobody cares about me. And I guess I'm just never going to be appreciated and blah, blah, blah. And then you're back in sadness and this goes back and forth. And how do you get out of this, right? Well, we choose different ways to get out of it, but depending on the method which you choose, you might make it worse before you make it better. So if you looked at this here, the disempowering choice, it's, a lot of us, what we try to do is we have a tendency to try to get out of this by going down and out. And that's a disempowering choice. These are the disturbs, right? Drinking, fighting, affairs, gambling, overeating, pornography, etc. These are the things that we think we're dealing with the issue to get out of that sadness or that anger. But what we're doing is we're just compounding the issue. We're going down and out. We're going down, but we're not going out. We're just kind of compounding the issue. We maybe get temporary relief, but we're not really doing what we need to do. The real solution to this is really to go up and out, which means to make an empowering choice, which means to change at its core, to change the meaning of what's happening. Very hard to do, though, when you're in a condition in which you're depressed, which is why you need help, right? You need other people to help you, or you need, better tools, better resources, coaching, obviously, biblical counseling, that kind of thing, making biblical choices, because you got to get up and out. It's the only real way out of this. Does this mean that you'll never go back into the cycle? No, right? Because life happens. But the better you get at making these empowering choices, the better you will be able to deal with these situations when they inevitably occur. So the idea, and part of the things that I do when I preach and I teach, is to help you have resources to make the empowering choices, right? Biblical solutions that can take you up and out instead of doing these false things that we tend to gravitate towards, down, and that never take you out, but that only compound the situation. Let me show you one other model that might be helpful. And this also comes from Tony Robbins, and it's very helpful, I think. And this is, and by the way, I know I'm a little bit over time. Please stay with me because I don't want to go to a third part. So give me another 15 minutes if you don't mind. The disempowering choices create hopelessness and learned helplessness. I'll talk about that in a minute. But let me show you this other model. Which is known as an emotional triad, okay? This is the way that we can, so state, which again is emotional state, is kind of at the center of this model. And the idea behind this is that there are three major factors that tend to affect state, our mental state. And those are, and I'll actually start from here, what you focus on, okay? What you focus on. The second thing is language, or the meaning that you give to something. And you saw on the Crazy 8 chart, you saw change the meaning, right? And then just ignore the other stuff. Emotion is life, feeling is life for now. Just look at focus, language, and physiology, right? So these are the three factors that mainly affect your state, your physiology, what you focus on, and the meaning that you give to it. So if you think about depression, which is the context of what we're looking at today, do you know what if I ask you, what does a depressed person look like? I bet you universally, whether you're American, you come from another country, Canadian, whatever you may be, you know, it's universal. This is a human thing. These cross ethnic boundaries, national boundaries. This is just human nature, right? Tell me in the chat, not verbally. Tell me in the chat, what does a depressed person look like? Just give me a few things in the chat. This is going to be a little bit of participation here. Okay, folks, help me out. What does a depressed person look like? Do they walk tall or do they slouch over? Like you. Okay, Mike, we got to talk. Is the depressed person? Are they walking tall, or are they kind of slumped over? Nobody. Slouching. Anybody else? Okay. Do they speak loudly or do they speak softly, quiet? Right? Is their head up or is their head sort of down? Low voice. Sometimes they hide their attitudes, head down, right? So we all know what it's slow walking. We all know what a depressed person looks like. Most times they look good, but they are not. Yeah, they look good, but what are they? But if someone's truly depressed, do they? I'm asking. I'm giving you the choices in terms of what they actually would look like if you compared a depressed person to a person who's not depressed. Is the depressed person walking upright and spry, or are they kind of walking slowly and they're kind of sulk, quiet, moody? Exactly. Okay. They look sad. Exactly. Because these are universal things that people go through. They physiologically, we're trained to do certain things if we are not feeling happy, if we're not feeling hopeful. Okay. What is the person in terms of language? No eye contact. In terms of language, are they speaking happy words? Nope. Right. They're usually, someone mentioned that they're speaking low, right? Short answers. Exactly. Right. How you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Okay. What you gonna do today? Not much. Right. So my point is that there's a pattern of physiologically how people are feeling. There's a pattern of how they use language. Okay. And then, of course, there's a pattern of what they focus on. And what people focus on when they are depressed is usually the problem. You're making me look at myself now. I hope so. I hope we're all looking at ourselves, because that's the whole point of this, right? The focus is what are they concentrating on, right? So Moses was looking at, they're complaining, they're there's no food here. What are we going to do? There's no animals. What are we going to do? We're going to kill them all the animals, and, to feed 600,000 people. There are too many people as compared to the amount of food, right? What was Elisha? Oh my goodness. Elijah focusing on. Elijah was focusing on the, there's nobody else but me. I've done all these things. He's looking at yesterday, right? I've done all these things, but today is different, right? I've done all these things, but nothing's happening for me today. It's all going downhill. He's looking at all the negative stuff. So what you focus on is going to make all the difference. Because whatever you're focusing on is going to contribute to the story that you're telling yourself. And remember, Elijah was telling the story over and over again, like an incantation. Even after he started listening to the voice, he went through the same, I'm all alone, there's nobody else, they're all after my life. So what he chose to focus on was all the stuff that was getting him down, as compared to, I'm alive, I serve Yahweh, there's a hopeful future. We just proved that Yahweh is Elohim to these people, and that Baal is nothing. We just proved that, the rains had just come back, right? And on we could go. There were things that he could focus on that were different. And the meaning that he would give those things also makes a difference. How he used his language. I'm the only one. Was he really the only one? Not really. That was the meaning that he was given to that particular circumstance. And by the way, he contributed to him being the only one by going in isolation. He had a servant who was going along with him. Where was his servant? Waiting in Beersheba. And then he goes into the wilderness and he's all alone. So he contributes to that feeling of isolation. And then the physiology, right? He's sitting down and doing nothing. Then he lies down and does nothing, right? He's doing everything that sad people do So Yahweh has to get him to snap out of that and to start taking action. Exactly right. When we focus on our past failures, it's difficult to take a different action to meet our goals or get the results we want. So we expect to fail, a self-fulfilling prophecy. Exactly. Moses, right? Who knows what he's doing with his physiology while he's going out in anger? Is he shaking his fist? Is he pointing? We don't know, right? But the point is that if you are not paying attention to what you're focusing on and the meaning that you're giving it and your physiology, you're going to continue sliding down that particular path. So the answer to all that is to change all those things in a direction where you need to go. So it's the up and out thing with the crazy eight, is to change the meaning. And the way you change the meaning is by focusing on better things, maybe on hope instead of, and the future. Hope is by its very nature, hope is a future-oriented thing. Focusing not on the actions of the past, but the actions of the present and moving forward. So if you're focusing on different things, not the yesterday, but the forward and the hope that it gives, it's going to change the way that you're able to do things. And the meaning that you give, it's going to change your story. And the physiology, just the very act of getting up. The angel says to Elijah, arise, go get something to eat, move towards something. Moses, go and do this particular thing. Gather people together. Don't just sit there whining and self-pity. Get up and go and do this. And when you do this, I'm going to act, you see. And he goes and he does it to his credit. But we have to take action in terms of what we're focusing on, because we're always focusing on something. The question is, what are we going to focus on? And if we're going to focus on all the negativity and the things that aren't working for us, then you can't focus on the things that are going to help you. You got to break that pattern. So, many of you may know the name Brene Brown, who talks about vulnerability and shame. Brene Brown, and by the way, she has a Netflix special if you want to catch that. The language is a little salty, but she's always a very good speaker. So I would encourage you to listen to that if you have a chance. I don't agree with everything Brene does. I certainly don't agree with her politics, but she's amazing at what she does. And she does vulnerability and she's a great speaker on vulnerability and shame and related topics. And she gives you some good examples of this kind of thing. And when you're in a condition where you're constantly sinking into yourself, one of the biggest things that you can do is pull yourself out of it with gratitude, because you can't be both grateful and sad or angry at the same time. So gratitude is huge. That may seem like a simplistic solution. I promise you that it is not. Gratitude is getting up like Elijah and having a meal, a good meal, a nourishing meal. It's nourishment, right? Let me go back to this. So I want to share this from a book called Learned Hopefulness. Learned Hopefulness. And this is from a fellow by the name of Dan Tomasulo. Tomasulo, Dan Tomasulo, who is a psychologist in a field that's actually known as positive psychology. And he wrote this book called Learned Hopefulness. And it's interesting. It's an interesting play on words on one of his mentors' work, a fellow by the name of Martin Seligman. And those of you who are in the mental health field probably know who Martin Seligman is. Seligman, Seligman. Can everyone see that book? Is it coming through on the thing? Okay, great. And some of you may have heard the term learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is a term that's been around since the 60s from Martin Seligman and his team and their work, where essentially they did work with animals to show that the animals learned how to be helpless. So, for example, if you shock, and I doubt seriously that they do experiments like this anymore. I could be wrong, but they did experiments, for example, with dogs where they would shock them. And they would do it in such a way that a certain group of dogs had a way out, and the other group of dogs didn't have a way out. And the ones who didn't have a way out eventually learned to just, or so they thought, they learned to just accept the shock and just to give up. And that research was then extended to human beings who have failure after failure, and then they wind up not even trying stuff because they've learned the ideas that they've learned how to become helpless, and they become very passive, and they don't seek to do things better. But it's interesting, the follow-up 50 years later, and this is what I want to share with you today. So I'm reading from this section here. In the 1960s, Martin Seligman theorized that feeling helpless and giving up in one situation creates feelings of helplessness in other situations, causing symptoms of depression. Initially, he and Steve Mayer researched how animals failed to escape shock after it was induced by uncontrollable aversive events. The term learned helplessness came from these studies and was eventually extended to how the real or perceived inability to control the outcome of a circumstance based on past learning was the cause of passivity. In other words, doing nothing and just giving up. In the 60s, the understanding and technology didn't allow for investigating the nuanced elements of how the brain functioned. So it was thought that depression was the result of learned helplessness. Seligman's research and theory have been the dominant view of depression in psychology until now. In their 50-year follow-up, the same researchers proved their initial theory wrong. Very interesting. Once they were able to use all the developments in brain science and biochemistry, they discovered, and get this, that passivity in response to shock is not learned. It is the default unlearned response to prolonged aversive events, which in turn inhibits escape. This deeper understanding has us looking forward to gain control. This deeper understanding has us looking forward to gain control, not backward to unlearn what has happened. What is the translation of this, and how does it apply to you? The translation is that they determined through whatever methods they use now that unlike what they had thought before, you don't really learn to become passive and to be helpless. It's what our brains operate on default to do. In other words, our brains are wired in such a way that if we're dealing with uncontrollable events, the default already is to save energy and to protect us by not even expending any energy to try to do anything different. So it's counterintuitive for us to do something, to get up, Elijah, and go and do something. This is one of the reasons why sometimes we need people to help us, to push us, because we're passively ready to just lay down and die. So Elijah wanting to just lie down and die is just his brain saying, I don't have any more strength to do any of this. I'm just gonna stop and shut down. We shut down. But this is important. This deeper understanding has us looking forward to gain control, not backward. In other words, let's not look backward to see where we learned something so that we can unlearn it. Waste of time. Instead, look forward, hope, which is what this ministry is all about. These new discoveries explain how bad events cause us to be anxious and passive by default. When something bad and prolonged happens, we are, I don't like the term evolutionarily, but we are programmed to shut down. We become passive because the brain, let's say, has provided us with a switch that shuts us down to save our energy when the situation seems bad. What this means for hope is that our very ability to detect and expect control in the future will pull us out of a slump. Focusing on what can be done in the future. Moses, go and get the people together. Elijah, go and listen to what I'm saying to you. Go and get something to eat. Focusing on what can be done in the future rather than on what happened in the past creates hope. In the researchers' own words, we speculate that it is expectations of a better future that most matter in treatment. Expectations of a better future that most matter in treatment. There's so much more I could say about that, but we're already way over time. But you get that? It's the hope of the future. Yahweh provides us hope. That is the biggest thing that we have going for us, is that we have hope for the future. So I'm going to wrap this up by going through some of those items here. And then, we could always pick up this topic again in the future. This doesn't have to be the end of it. Just so much. Yeah, this is why Paul was constantly talking about hope. Absolutely. Matter of fact, Yahshua, they refer to, what is the term that's used about hope with Yahshua the Messiah? I forget the exact term, but it's a term dealing with hope. Okay, so let me go to this section here, and we will wrap it up. All kinds of good stuff here. Okay, so actions that attack depression. And I've been talking about all of these, so I could just quickly go through them, right? Keep up your daily routine if it's all possible. Can everyone see that, by the way? Just let me know in the chat. Thank you. Yahshua and you, the hope of glory. Exactly. Exactly. Can everyone see this? Okay. Keep up your daily routine if it is at all possible. It's more beneficial for you to get up in the morning, get dressed, have breakfast, go to your place of work, or do your household tasks and go through the motions of working than to remain at home in bed with your discomforting thoughts. 2, try to get out even for very short periods of time. 3, try to see family members and friends as much as possible, but for very short periods of time because you don't want to overtax yourself, right? 4, deliberate physical activity is, and he uses this term, I don't know why you complicate things, is a necessity for overcoming depression. We do not mean calisthenics or vigorous sports unless you want to try them, but involvement in any physical activity you ordinarily might like. If you find it difficult during this period to talk to the people you live with, try writing a note, explaining your feelings and struggles. It's a good idea. Maybe you're not ready to talk to people, but write a note. Let your partner know that it's really not business as usual in your relationships, right? Try to remember that severe depressions will usually end, right? If you can believe that you will not always be feeling this way, again, that's hope, future-oriented. By the way, that's what coaching is future-oriented. If you can believe that you will not always be feeling this way, you might find each day easier to get through. So, and a person who's external can remind you this is not always going to be like this. And especially if someone who's gone through something like that before can often be helpful. It's not always going to be this way. Tomorrow's going to be better. There's no sense in denying that it's happening, right? There's no big deal. I'm minimizing it. And right. This is why, these things about, over spiritualizing things are not helpful because you got to acknowledge, validate the person's pain. Yeah, it's happening. Elijah, the journey is too long for you. It's too much for you. So let's do this. Eat small amounts of food several times throughout the day. Deal with anger in a biblical manner. That's Ephesians 4:26. In other words, don't let the sun set on your anger. Find a trustworthy person, a family member or friend to whom you can pour out your heart. Talk to people, right? Change the way you talk to yourself. What is that? I mean, focus, meaning. Instead of dwelling on your faults, look for positive things in your life. Understand your feelings, but focus on your behavior. Forward, right? Forward thinking, hope. Utilize the word of Yahweh as a resource of encouragement and power. The Psalms are there for a reason, right? You might use a Psalm like Psalm 69 to validate what you're feeling right now. But then you might use a Psalm like Psalm 23 to remember that Yahweh is always by your side. And then you might use a Psalm like Psalm 91 to remember that Yahweh is always going to defend you and then you might use a, right? So it's progressive. You can use all the Psalms to your benefit. Even the ones that allow you to lament, to grieve. There are several really good Psalms. Just ask me about them. There are several good Psalms, great Psalms to grieve in the moment. So you know that it's a human condition and the way you're feeling is not anything new and it's not anything to be ashamed of because the best of us, including someone like David, grieved also because of the pain in his life. I love that the Bible, not just in the Psalms, but everywhere, gives you the good, the bad, and the ugly because that's the human condition. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth the paper it's printed on or the parchment that it's printed on because it'd be lying to you, and it's not. That's why I'll follow the Bible by the grace of Yahweh till the day that I die. Build relationships with others. Withdrawing only reinforces depression. Choose healthy ways to cope with stress. Join a support group where you can learn from others seeking victory from depression. Learn to laugh at life. It's important. Play praise or worship music in the background as you go through your day. These are all great suggestions. Realize there's hope. You will feel better someday. Okay. And there's more, but I'll leave it at that for now. Okay. Are there any questions or is there anything that I can review or clarify today?